This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and much more dangerous. There is a moment in every system when rules still exist on paper, but obedience to them becomes optional. When power discovers that endings are negotiable. When the machinery meant to stop a crisis starts improvising instead. You are not watching chaos. You are watching structure under strain. Because what happens when authority refuses to recognize limits isn't immediate collapse. It's hesitation, delay, workarounds, emergency language replacing ordinary process. The system keeps moving, but it no longer knows which direction is forward. That's the risk. Not the noise, not the shouting. The risk is normalization. If you want to understand why tonight feels different, even if nothing has officially ended yet, stay with me. Because what's unfolding is not the climax. It's the setup. And once you see the mechanism underneath, you can't unsee it. What actually controls a system like this is not anger. It's leverage. Not the kind you see, the kind you feel only when it's gone. Authority doesn't live in a building or a title. It lives in shared acceptance. The quiet agreement that when a line is reached, everyone recognizes it and steps back. But when that agreement fractures, power doesn't disappear. It migrates. It moves into emergency procedures, into provisional language, into phrases like temporary, voluntary, until further notice. The system keeps functioning, but no one is fully in charge anymore. Decisions stack, responsibility blurs, and here's the shift most people miss. When institutions stop relying on routine and start relying on coordination, they become faster, but also more fragile. Every move depends on everyone else moving at the same time. One delay, one refusal, one miscalculation. That's when pressure replaces legitimacy. That's when compliance is no longer assumed. And that's why what you're seeing isn't disorder. It's consolidation under stress, which leads to the most dangerous phase. Here's what changed, and almost no one noticed when it happened. There was a time when escalation was rare, when invoking extraordinary powers carried a cost. Political, institutional, psychological. The system resisted using them because using them meant admitting something had gone wrong. Now escalation is procedural. Emergency measures don't feel exceptional anymore. They feel available, on the shelf, pre-written, ready to deploy. What once required consensus now requires timing. Before, the threat was sudden collapse. Now it's gradual adaptation. And that's worse, because slow change doesn't trigger alarms. It rewires expectations. Each step feels justified by the last. Each response framed as necessary, temporary, defensive, until the system forgets what normal used to look like. This is how boundaries erode without being crossed. The danger isn't that rules are broken. It's that they're reinterpreted in real time. And when that happens, power doesn't seize control violently. It inherits it quietly. By the time most people sense something is wrong, the shift is already complete. And the next moment isn't theoretical anymore. It arrives as impact. Then the system flinched. Not rhetorically, physically. Procedures that normally unfold slowly were compressed into hours. Safeguards designed for deliberation were executed under urgency. Decisions that usually tolerate dissent suddenly required unanimity, or close enough to simulate it. This wasn't about symbolism. It was about containment. You could see it in how language changed. Words like request began carrying the weight of ultimatums. Phrases meant to preserve dignity were paired with timelines that erased it. Everything sounded voluntary. Nothing actually was. This is the moment people mistake for drama. It's not. It's the system testing whether refusal still exists as an option, whether non-compliance is symbolic or destabilizing, whether authority still flows downward or has started moving sideways, person to person, institution to institution. If you're watching closely, this is where the temperature spike matters more than the headline, because when emergency coordination replaces ordinary process, the margin for error disappears. And the next failure doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives mechanically. If you're still with me, don't look away here, because this was only the signal. Here's the part that doesn't make the headlines. When a system enters emergency mode, it doesn't distribute risk evenly. It concentrates it, quietly, predictably. At the center, decisions become abstract. Legal, strategic, temporary. But the consequences don't stay there. They move outward, downward, into enforcement, into logistics, into people whose job is to execute, not question. This is how the mechanism works. Institutions issue signals, not commands. Signals are safer. They preserve deniability. They allow distance. Someone else interprets them. Someone else carries them out. Someone else absorbs the fallout. Those at the top retain flexibility. Those at the edges inherit liability. And the system depends on this imbalance to function under stress, because if responsibility were shared equally, nothing would move. So it's passed along, fragmented, until no single actor feels fully accountable for what happens next. That's how escalation becomes self-sustaining. No one has to choose the worst outcome. They only have to avoid stopping it. And once that threshold is crossed, the next phase doesn't require intent. It requires momentum. Then the pace changes. Shorter timelines, tighter perimeters, less tolerance for delay. Movement accelerates not because everyone agrees, but because waiting becomes riskier than acting. Crowds form before decisions finalize. Security moves before clarity arrives. Authority deploys before legitimacy catches up. You can feel it when language collapses into commands, when coordination turns reactive, when the system starts planning for worst-case scenarios not as contingencies, but as expectations. At this stage, every action creates its own justification. Presence demands response. Response provokes counter-response. No one is steering anymore. They're correcting. That's how instability compounds. Not through one dramatic failure, through many small, reasonable choices made under pressure, each one defensible, together irreversible. This is the point of no return most people miss, not when something breaks, but when stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. And once that calculation flips, the system doesn't ask permission to escalate. It just does. What happens next isn't decided by intent. It's decided by proximity. This is where it reaches you, not abstractly, not philosophically, practically. Because when systems destabilize, they don't fail all at once. They fail unevenly. You feel it as delays, as uncertainty, as rules applied differently depending on where you stand. What you're told today quietly contradicts what you were told yesterday. You start adjusting without realizing it. You avoid certain places, you change routines, you lower expectations. That's the cost. Not panic, but compression. Life narrowing around risk calculations you didn't used to make. And the most unsettling part is how quickly it feels normal. How fast you adapt to instability because resisting it requires energy you don't have. This is how large crises become personal without ever announcing themselves. If this feels uncomfortable, good. It means you're still paying attention, because disengagement is what systems under strain rely on. Silence is a stabilizer. Stay with me. Share this if you want someone else to understand why this feels heavier than it should, because the pressure doesn't stop at individuals. It radiates outward. This doesn't stay contained. It never does. When a central system hesitates, every connected system recalibrates. Markets pause, alliances hedge, rivals test boundaries. Not aggressively at first, carefully, quietly, watching for signals. Uncertainty is information, and right now, the signal is delay. International systems don't wait for explanations. They respond to behavior, to gaps, to moments where authority appears conditional. Every hour without resolution forces others to plan around instability they didn't create. That's how local stress becomes global risk. Confidence drains before collapse ever arrives. Investment slows, coordination thins, commitments acquire footnotes. The world doesn't panic, it prepares, and preparation changes outcomes. Because once trust is rerouted, restoring it takes longer than breaking it. Even if order returns, the memory of hesitation remains. Systems remember vulnerability. This is why moments like this matter beyond borders. Not because of what happens, but because of what might. And the future doesn't wait for certainty. It accelerates into it. From here, the system has three ways forward. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Authority reasserts itself just enough to restore routine. Processes resume. Language cools. The system absorbs the shock and quietly rewrites its own rules to survive it. Stability returns, but narrower than before. More conditional. The second is erosion. Nothing formally breaks. No single moment marks failure. Instead, confidence thins. Compliance becomes selective. Emergency tools stay within reach. Each future crisis is handled a little faster, a little rougher. The exception becomes the template. And then there's rupture. That's when coordination fails, when parallel authorities collide, when enforcement fragments, when loyalty matters more than legitimacy. Not sudden collapse, but cascading misalignment. The system still moves, but against itself. Which path emerges doesn't depend on rhetoric. It depends on timing. on restraint, on whether stopping still feels possible. The most dangerous part is that all three can look identical in their early stages. Calm can be recovery or compression. Order can be strength or delay. You won't know which one you're in until momentum chooses for you, and momentum is already building. There is a temptation at moments like this to look for closure, a statement, a decision, a moment that restores the feeling that the system is back in control. That temptation is dangerous because systems under strain don't fail when they collapse. They fail when everyone assumes someone else will stop it in time, when vigilance is outsourced, when attention drifts back to routine before the risk has passed. What you've been watching isn't an ending, it's a test. Not of one office, not of one institution, of whether limits still mean anything when they're challenged directly. Nothing here guarantees catastrophe, but nothing here guarantees safety either. The mechanisms are in motion. The incentives are set. The only unknown variable left is pressure, and how much of it the system can absorb before it changes shape permanently. That's why this isn't a story you watch once. It's one you track. Stay with this. Follow the signals, not the noise. Because the next moment won't announce itself as historic. It will arrive quietly, procedurally, with language that sounds temporary. And by the time it feels resolved, something irreversible may already be in place. If you want to understand what happens next before it happens, stay with me.